We're not talking to China. We're not talking to Beijing or Moscow. We're not talking to anybody in Tehran. We're not talking to anybody in Delhi anymore. We're talking to ourselves. And we're quite convinced that we're right, everyone else is wrong, and everyone else should do what we tell them to do. At every turn, our answer to the Russians, and whenever they express their views on anything, and whenever they tried to explain their legitimate national security interests, whenever they talked about a new security architecture, one in which Russian security, German security, anyone's security in Europe would not be purchased at the expense of anyone else. And what did we answer? We answered with escalation. We've continued to provide the Ukrainians with the means to attack Russia on Russian soil. We have been behind or had our hands in all of the quote unquote modest, successful strategic strikes that certainly garnered a great deal of attention, but did nothing to alter the course of the war. These are the drone strikes on the Russian strategic bombers, the most recent ones against the gasification refinery plants in Russia. None of these things were crippling in a strategic sense. None of these are altering the course of events. But they seem to create the illusion in the minds of the people that launched them that there's life in this regime in Kiev. In the meantime, as I think you pointed out some time ago, we just watched something in the neighborhood of 13,000 Ukrainian men between the ages of 18 and 25 leave the country, conveying the impression that the Ukrainian government has decided that if they don't let these people go, they too will be murdered on the battlefield, because there's no alternative to that right now. They're dealing with a military machine they cannot resist. And so perhaps it's prudent to let them leave in the hopes that at some point they can come back and repopulate Ukraine. I don't know. I'm speculating. But the whole picture is ridiculous. We continue down a path that has no chance of success, but it's doing a damn fine job of alienating the rest of the world. And that's what we saw in China over the last few days. And by the way, all that Chinese military might that was on display was not aimed at us. It was simply a clear and unambiguous signal that we cannot be bullied. You can't bully us into submission. You can't force us into any sort of arrangement that is not in our interest. And by the way, they haven't said anything or done anything to suggest that they want to harm us. We're the ones insisting that their success in any way, shape, or form is harming us. I mean, stop and consider this. We've spent what, between $8 and $14 trillion since 2001 on all of these catastrophic military strategic failures. Just stop and think about that sum. The Chinese have invested perhaps $1 trillion in building up the infrastructure for the One Belt, One Road that basically is designed to connect everyone on the Eurasian continent and Africa back to China and vice versa. In other words, a new commercial structure beyond anything that was conceived of under the Mongolian Empire in terms of commercial ties between East and West. Something beyond anything we've seen, certainly since the end of the Second World War, that promises to create enormous prosperity all over Eurasia and potentially Africa in time. And we are treating that as catastrophic. Something has to be resisted. Something has to be broken because we are not in charge of it. It's not our idea. We didn't think of it. And we utterly refuse to be part of anything that we do not dominate. That's essentially what it comes down to. So Donald Trump, for all of his rhetoric about, settling conflicts and promoting peace and prosperity, is in the same business as his predecessor, trying to cling to the impossible position of global military hegemony run from Washington. Zelensky's prescription is global thermonuclear war launched by the United States against Russia. It's insane. It makes no sense. And my great fear is that there are people in Washington that don't understand that that is the inevitable outcome if we don't take the off-ramp and get off of this dead-end road that we're on with Zelensky, because that's what he wants. He just doesn't want Europe to support him. He wants us to make it impossible for Russia to defeat him or anyone else. Well, that's not going to happen. We have no interest in that. And I think that President Trump foolishly listens to this man, and obviously to people around him, who tell him that we are more powerful than we are, that we are in a position to dictate terms, which we're not. And this man, Zelensky, is evidence for all of that kind of thinking. So the real question at this stage is, President Trump, what are you going to do to extricate the United States from this utterly pointless and fruitless policy that you inherited from President Biden? Thus far, his answer is nothing. I'm going to keep it up. I'm going to continue to do it. And if you really want to push this to the limits, you will end up in a nuclear exchange with Russia. The Russians have been very straightforward. We understand the conditions that they've described. None of those are unacceptable, frankly, to us. We do not lose as a result of supporting neutrality for whatever remains of Ukraine. We don't lose with a government in Kiev that is at least not hostile, if not aligned with Moscow. We lose if we are dragged into a war over a part of the world that is of no strategic importance to us against Russia. That's how we lose. And what you saw again over in China was a group of people, what is it, more than 40% of the world's population, and probably at least half of its natural resources, mineral wealth, oil, gas, you name it. We saw a demonstration that they have all gotten together and said, we would like to have peace in our time with the United States, but we will not submit to Donald Trump's bullying tactics. So he's got to make a decision. Where does he want to take us? Further and further down the road to disaster and potential war? Or does he want to get off the train, go somewhere else in a new direction? But see, this is also bound up with this financial system that we built after the Second World War, which is crumbling. We went to Bretton Woods. We went off the gold standard. We have taken this thing called fiat currency, which has no real value except what we impute to it. And most of that depends on trust in the United States government. Well, I think trust in the United States government is at an all-time low, both overseas and here at home. So the question is, what are we going to do as this crumbles in front of us? Do we simply sink into a depression? Do we restructure the debt? No, nobody goes there. No, we give Besant orders from the White House. Find a new scam, some new means to get around reality. So he's turned to these treasury bills. The whole idea of reevaluating or revaluing gold has gone down the toilet. And part of that, at least, is because no one really knows what we've got. All we know is that the Germans and the Italians who've asked to repatriate their gold, we've told them, no, we're not repatriating all of it. So the question is, well, why not? The suspicion is we don't have it all. You see where I'm going? In other words, we're talking about the Ukraine war, but the Ukraine war that is mightily our responsibility. We built it up. We created the forces in Ukraine. We sent them into action. We've bled the country white. And yet Trump acts as though this is something that happens somewhere else that has nothing to do with us, which of course is absurd. So we've done that. We're in very serious financial trouble. You can't view one in isolation from the other. So if we stay on this track, the question is, which happens first? Are we dragged into an unnecessary self-defeating collision with the Russians on the strategic level, which could invite a nuclear exchange? Or the alternative right now is to continue on the current path and go down financially into total and complete ruin, into something worse than the Depression of the 1930s. So which is it? Which comes first?